Hello, friends. In this episode, I sit down with Ami Kozak. Ami started off as a musician, then became a comedian, and is currently fighting for Israel through activism. Ami is a fascinating character. It was an incredible conversation. We dove deep into his story, and we got into a juicy and controversial discussion as to if what Israel is doing currently in the Middle East is the right thing to do or not. Obviously, the views shared on this podcast is our own personal views and doesn't necessarily represent a whole. And yeah, guys, I highly recommend checking out Ami. His links are in the description. He is host of his own podcast called Ami's House. You can find him on Instagram as well. And finally, guys, this podcast is made possible by the Men's Therapy Studio. Are you feeling lost or overwhelmed as you try to navigate your place in this world? Well, you're not alone. The Men's Therapy Studio is here for clients like you facing the big questions of career, relationships, heartbreak, and who you want to be. We take your challenges seriously in a world that often doesn't, so hop on a free consultation call. Many insurances are accepted, and enjoy. Finally, guys, Patreon is now available for extra content. Subscribe to Patreon. Hope to see you there. And there are many more episodes of the Gabi Koyenov Podcast available on other platforms such as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere you listen. So enjoy, guys, and send some love, share your feedback. Also, subscribe. What's hilarious about you is, you do so many things. I first had been introduced to you from, a Jordan Peterson impression, which was hilarious. And then all of a sudden, I'm hearing you do, music, and then you do other types of comedy, and you do Israel activism and stuff. And I want to dive deep into these things. But I'm just curious to know, where did you get your start with this creativity? And, how do you consider yourself a musician, a comedian, all of that?
The short answer is I was always a funny kid, but I never considered myself to be professionally funny. My professional routes and path for a long time was purely a musical route. I was always singing as a kid, and I think I learned how to sing by the ability to impersonate other singers. So there was probably some connective tissue there. But then I began playing bass guitar at the age of 13 and played in high school with a band for a long time. Started playing live shows from the age of 15, doing community events and then clubs, all ages nights in the city whenever I could, and eventually kept playing with friends, and then took it professional when I began to study music at the Berklee College of Music. That's where I went for college. Studied film scoring and composing and music production. After leaving Berklee, I began composing music for ads, some film, TV, background music, and songs to be placed in commercials, film, and TV. I moved out to California, started a band there, and we were very, very active in the music scene in LA and still are today. Doing original music. The band's called Distant Cousins, and we write and compose original music, and we've had a lot of music in commercials, trailers, film, TV, as well as composing background underscore and scoring for kids' animated TV shows, theme songs. So for a long time, that was my creative identity. I was a musician, and I am a musician. And I would, perform, in addition to with my band, performing with other people and doing session work and all that kind of stuff. On the comedy side, that was like a neglected child that I never really paid as much attention to professionally because there wasn't really an outlet for it. I went to music school. I didn't go to acting school, and I didn't go to theater school. I didn't go to join improv groups. I played in bands. And I was doing a little bit of voiceover work at the beginning of my career, but there wasn't an outlet for it. You sort of pick different paths, and while they're similar, they don't overlap. Until social media became a tool by which I used it for, putting any kind of a creative ideas I had out there. And one of the easiest things to do on social media in the beginning was to put out impressions and impersonations, which I had always been able to do socially. But I performed them in the sense of for friends or on stage for events and things like that. It was a known feature of me. But once I started using social media, particularly TikTok, to feature that, I was able to grow an audience organically around my comedy. And that's when I was sort of comfortable with the label of content creator, comedian, after videos started taking off. Early ones like my Gary V impersonation started to really blow up. And that was really a turning point. Like one of my first videos that went viral was Gary V. sitting in his car, and I wasn't even going to post it. I wasn't sure if it was that good, but it was just like, I'm just so sick of 40-year-olds complaining that they're not killing it, right? Like, if you want to win, move to Louisiana and start a peanut butter brand. Okay? Love it so much. So I posted that, and it kind of blew up. And like, after that, I was like, you get some sort of public validation. Like, yeah, you're not just like funny to friends and stuff, but like, this is like it gave a certain validation, which is important in the creative business. To know that, even just to have the confidence to like say, like, to believe in yourself in a certain way. So I was able to pursue that. It was COVID around that time, and I was ready to like sort of start doing stand-up and developing that skill set. But then COVID happened, so I started just doubling down on social media, making content, impressions, comedic sketches, which was a really nice, cool other lane to open up while continuing to do music. And then once things opened back up again, about a year after COVID, I moved back to the East Coast and dove headfirst into the stand-up scene, and have been developing sort of a synthesis of myself as a musician, artist, comedian, using all the things that I have at my disposal. And most recently, with the October 7th happened, and that kind of changed my outlook on the dangers of like seeing all this anti-Semitism that had sort of blown up, especially on the far left, but also now the far right. That used to be something that people were concerned about, but I was not really particularly concerned about it. But that, obviously, the way it changed a lot of Jews around the world and looking at the situation, it changed me too. And I began speaking about that. And I'd always been able to, like I said, with comedy, socially talk about ideas and discuss ideas and formulate clear thoughts. But I never used social media or any sort of public platform to put it out there. That just wasn't what I was interested in doing for the masses. I was interested exclusively in entertaining people. But, if it comes to making people dance through music or make people laugh through comedy, now I also make people think through commentary, and that's okay. I don't consider myself a scholar or a public intellectual. I'm just trying to be commonsensical, and that's how we arrive at today.
Dude, that's amazing. By the way, is it weird that I'm like fangirling over you right now?
No, it's okay.
Yeah, those are so many talents that you've actually had some level of success with, which would be like hard in any individual area.
I guess so. I mean, the trick is really just consistency, I think, I've been doing music for 15 years. And then even social media was several years of obscurity, But with each, as your profile is raised in one area, it's a little easier to sidestep to another and build off of that. For one thing, you have a little bit of a public presence. I was sort of known in some circles on the music side, but also you become better at all the things you're doing. So you increase your skill stack, and all the mistakes you learn in one go around are applied to the next thing of what to avoid, of what works, what doesn't work. So it's not like you don't miss. It's just that you apply the effective tools and the things that you become aware of that are not working to the things that you become aware of that are working. So it exponentially moves things a little bit faster with each thing. Like the first business one builds is probably the hardest to figure out. And then once you do that, it becomes potentially easier to replicate in other endeavors.
All right. But it's so interesting to me. I guess, like, do you find the skills of building a successful music career helpful in comedy? And it sounds like you're saying you do, because like there are things that you learned from the process about what to do, what not to do, that were very transferable. And I'm curious to like understand that more.
Yeah, because the same principles apply everywhere, which is you have to become undeniably exceptionally good at the craft, and at the same time become undeniably and exceptionally disciplined at the output and the outreach. So there's very little excuses to be made, given social media, given the ability to make music in your bedroom that could become a hit song or a song used in a big commercial campaign. Like, we have all the tools now, and a lot of people are trying to find quick hacks. Get 100K followers in 2 weeks, or quick hacks to how to make the hit song fat. It's like, it takes a lot of disciplined work to just focus on getting better at the craft, while also being creatively conscious of like what's going on out there if you're trying to make a living doing what you're doing and not just doing it as a hobby. If you want to just do it as a hobby, like, get good at the craft. If you're also trying to commoditize and monetize what you're doing and sell your art in some particular way, there's a whole other discipline of trying to figure out how that works. Like, there are ways by which certain things happen. And a lot of times I think people just spend most of the time thinking and strategizing and watching. But that's not the thing, you know? You can watch 1,000 videos on fitness and diet. And this is like another, you know, I'm guilty of that. But it's not going to put you in shape.
Right.
What's going to put you in shape is going to the gym every single day, 5 to 7 days a week, and actually doing it. Like there are simple answers that are just very hard to do. So it applies across everything.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, that's so fascinating, and I love that. And it's like I want to kind of understand your music journey at first. Like you said, you've been doing it for 15 years. Like, did your parents get you into it? Like, how did that look like for you? That start
I
of
was always
music.
very encouraged by my parents to keep pursuing it. I took private lessons as a teenager, like studying music and learning music theory, learning how to play an instrument, learning how to and performing, and they were very very good about also comedy. They were encouraging of me. My first audience was probably my parents and their friends, just doing impressions of them. So
Yeah.
psychologically, that was very very important. That was super crucial in me feeling confident enough that I could, you know, that I was meant to do it in a sense.
Mhm.
And that's an asset. It also can be a liability because then you feel like it's owed to you, and then you've come up against the world, and you realize like it
Mhm.
actually takes much more hard work and discipline and grit than talent. Even though
Mhm.
the talent's necessary, it's not sufficient, you know, to just
Yeah.
necessarily get success. And
So what was that process like for you? I'm curious. Like, were you successful in the beginning? Was that a process? Was there like a turning point for you where it was like you were kind of doing this for fun and didn't maybe see where it was gonna go, and then all of a sudden like things got real?
probably the turning point was, you know, when I got the first commercial for a song I wrote
Hmm.
to use it in the commercial. The first like job I quote won. Um, when you
Hmm.
come out of school, like, you know, everybody when you're a student and you're in that mentality, you're like, okay, I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to try to quote, make it in the music business, but I don't know if I'm one of those who's cut out. Like, which side of this equation am I going to be on? The guy who's trying to, like, you know, how do I, you know, people say we don't have to care what people think. You don't have to care what the world thinks. Just do what you do. And that's in some ways true, focusing on getting better. But at the same time, also, there are markers along the way that can indicate if you're doing something that's leaning more towards success or away from it. So
Hmm.
to be completely blinded to what's going on around you, I don't think is helpful. But like I had been like interning at a studio for almost a year. I don't know how long. Yeah, close to a year, just trying to get a piece of music on the TV, like in some sort of commercial,
Hmm.
and like until that first one happens, you really are like having just wondering if you're cut out for it. Like you just don't
Interesting.
know
Yeah.
because everyone can say, yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's great, but you just don't know. And once somebody's willing to pay and really validate what you're doing with not just words but actual, like, that's the ultimate confirmation. Like it's valuable enough that we're going to buy this, license this piece of music for a massive campaign. I ended up winning like one of the biggest jobs at the company I was interning for, and that was a changing moment where I was like, okay, I'm not just like an intern trying to compose music for TV,
Hmm.
for commercials. I am a composer, you know.
Wow, that's incredible, man. And this was like what type of song was this for the commercial?
It's like a fun, light acoustic kind of Jason Mrazzi song for San Diego tourism, called
Mhm.
"Happiness Is Calling Me." It was just kind of a light, fun song that was ended up used in their national ad campaign. It was a San Diego tourism
That's
campaign.
awesome. Okay.
And you could look it up on
Right.
YouTube, but yeah, it's and it ended up running for like 2 or 3 years, getting renewed. And then after that, you know, I got a few more things and started to get more consistent work demoing and composing for commercials.
Hmm. Hmm. So is that where like the music kind of plateaued? Like you were just doing commercials? Did you find a way to like evolve past that?
No, yeah, and then in addition to just composing on my own, once I moved to California, I partnered with my two eventual bandmates, and we also had this idea like all these commercials are using songs from bands in their commercials. Like, let's write a few songs of our own and see what can happen with them. So we had a hunch that we could do well with it and make songs that would work, not and that would be good, and that would also work in the world of sync licensing. So the first one we got
Hmm.
was a validation point where we were like, okay, we were right on this investment to say like we had a sense, and that sense was validated by the world. That was validated by this space. So we started writing a lot of songs and partnering with companies to get our songs in Macy's commercials and feature films, and then we were like, hey, we could probably maybe we could write a theme song, you know, for a kids animated show. And you could say that all day, but if you've never done it, how do you really know until you do it? So
Right.
then we
Okay.
did it.
Yeah.
We got songs, and we ended up writing a bunch of theme songs for kids' television shows. And then we're like, I think we could actually score and compose all the music for the entire season. And
Interesting. Okay.
eventually
Wow.
that happened. I mean, I'm skipping years in between, and work in
Right. Right.
between.
Right.
But we work towards those things, and it's a constant evolution of that. So and we enjoy it all. You have to enjoy the process along the way too. We're not.
Yeah.
These goals aren't, say, the sole reason driving us to do it. It's more that we want to do it, so we want to accomplish these things so you can keep doing it. A lot of people focus on the goals and not the process, but the process of making the music is what we want to do, and so we want these
Right.
things to happen so that we can continue to be creative, write songs, compose music. It's the same in any other endeavor.
So it was like a real love for the
Of
art
course,
and the process. That's so cool.
if you don't, you're going to spend most of your time miserable, and then when the goals happen, they
Right.
will be underwhelming.
You know, what's interesting is like I'm a therapist, right? My first job out of college was as a school counselor, and I love
Yeah.
that job. Literally, I almost never felt like I was working because it was the best job ever. I was just going there and I was helping people out, and it was great. And I talked to other school counselors that did not like their job, and I was like, how do you not like this job? I don't get it. And it's so sad to me when you have people that especially like as a counselor and I'm working with people that don't like their jobs. It's shocking to me. It's like you're working just to live, and it's sad. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
some people have that are able to be okay with sort of looking at work as that means to an end to enjoy other things. I don't think there's
Right.
anything wrong with that. I find that personally to be would be very difficult. People
Right.
have different thresholds for that. Some people find real fulfillment in the work itself. Some people find that the work is stable and works temperamentally with them and allows them to do things they're passionate about or go places they want to go. I don't really judge in that regard. But
I hear
but
you.
for me
Yeah.
personally, like, it would certainly be hard to look at work as a means to an end as opposed to the end in and of itself.
Right.
It's just how I'm
Of course,
a little
of
bit
course.
wired that way.
Yeah, that's fair. Like to me, I think it's about like the line, I guess. How much are they sacrificing? How much do they hate their job? How accurate is it that they're, being able to go where they want to
Yeah.
go?
But also, if you're a counselor, I don't know how much a school counselor is. It's not my business how much they make. But if you're gonna hate what you do, then
Right.
hate something that pays, I guess.
Yeah, that's
Like,
true.
why not just hate it and make?
Honestly, school counselors get paid.
Yeah, they get paid well. Okay, good.
Very
You would
nice.
know better than me, so maybe it was worth it. Clearly, it was. At least for some people.
Yeah, but you know Conor McGregor, right?
Yes.
So he has this story where when he started out, I don't know exactly how old he was. He was like maybe 19. He was a plumber, and he was just miserable, and he was like, I don't understand how people could live like this.
I don't understand how people could live like this. I only count knockouts. I don't do a good Connor, but people do better than me. It's a very.
That's actually
I
not
only
bad.
count knockouts. It's a very, very specific Irish. It's a very specific Irish region. It's not your typical Irish accent. It's much more. It's much more like, I don't even know how they do it. I don't even count knockout. It's so. His is. It's
Yeah.
anyway. Yeah.
That's so awesome that we could just like be talking about someone and you could just like break out into
Yeah, but I can't stand on that Connor one. The Connor one is, I mean, I could do a little bit of the Irish melody, the Irish sort of inflection point, but it's not quite art. I don't know how people do it. I only count knockouts. Count. That's a little more Scottish, but his is so specific.
No.
So like Brits can do it well.
Yeah.
I can't really do it perfectly.
Right. But tell me about how you had that instinct to like follow your passion instead of like selling out, which I feel like there's so many talented people that don't pursue what they're passionate about. Yeah, because of fear and because like it's unstable, and then they want to go down a more stable route. But it's like, how did you have that instinct to like, hey, let me follow my passion? Because music is not necessarily the most stable
No.
career. So it's like, how did
Well,
you
what
know?
do you mean by selling out?
I think there are people that have a passion and an inclination to go into a certain direction. Like, say they are very musically talented and they would pursue music, and instead of going to music school because, like you did, you went to Berkeley, they'll become an accountant or something like that, and then continue their music as a side passion or something like that. And I think a lot of people have regret for that. Many years later, they look back and they feel like they're perhaps a sellout. I'm not saying everyone does, but there are people that
Well,
have.
I was given, emotional, psychological support from coming from a family and parents who were so encouraging that like that you should do this, be conscious of everything and be realistic, but also like you have what it takes, to
Hmm.
make it, or like you're good enough, you're talented enough that if you work really hard and do it, you'll you'll be successful. And I'm raised in that upper middle class like Jewish environment. Sometimes there's a lot of discouragement from going into those kind of careers, but in my case I guess I was just lucky that my parents you know helped and provided me with you know bought me an instrument when I was 13 years old, and paid for private lessons in school so that I could learn and get better and nurture the craft. So I don't credit myself with
Hmm.
just that instinct of that. I mean, I find it's unfortunate for people who feel unfulfilled and wish they could have pursued more artistic things. And I've talked about that, like that
Yeah.
there's especially in the world now where you can really build an audience and do it. But it's hard. Like it's a hard thing. It doesn't come easy. It's not for the faint of heart. And like I completely respect at this point this idea of like trying to balance career stability, family, and unstable passion careers that are a much more long game investment of time. But having that early on, having people who were willing to support me while I interned for free, you know, after
Hmm.
college for a few for those months, like in the early days, it's like you know, so I credit that and having that support. So if that wasn't there, like I would have had, I think I'd like to say I would have done anything and I had to do to because I was so passionate about it. But again, I also credit having a good support system around me.
Wow. So that's really beautiful. I was hoping to come out with some type of like applicable, some type of transferable kind of concept or nugget for like inspiration for that somebody could take from it. But it's like, you know, I'm hearing your story and it's like having that support system and everything is so powerful. And I guess it's like, how can we maybe offer that type of support system for family and friends? But it's tough because like you're saying you were financially held down.
Well, no, in the world we're in today, I think like you know you could be a lawyer and struggle,
Yeah.
and you could be in all sorts of areas that are seemingly
Hmm.
stable but also struggle in different ways. So
Right.
I remember after I graduated college, it was the economic collapse. It was 2008, 2009, and no one had a job. And some people just went to law school to sort of wait it
Yeah.
out. And things were completely unstable. So all this like expectation of like a solid economy that everyone was going to go into, and I majored in the right things, just got thrown for a loop. And at the end of the day, if you work really, really hard, focus, stay consistent, focus on getting undeniably good at what you're doing, you can find success in various ways, especially in the world we're in today. It was very understandable if you're growing up in the 90s to be told like, hey, that entertainment business, that music business is tricky. Only a few people make it, only a few people. And maybe that was more largely true then when there were so many gatekeepers in the business that decided who gets to be successful and who gets to not. But these days, it's, you could be a gamer on Twitch and make a decent amount of money at an early age if you build up enough of a following. Like that, those opportunities didn't exist when I was growing up. So, you know, there's all these different ways to be
Wow.
entrepreneurial, to apply an entrepreneurial spirit to any endeavor, artistic, business, startup, whatever. And Jews care about
Hmm.
success. They don't care about what you're doing. Like, people brag in shul about, oh, what does he do? I think it's boxes. They make boxes for hard drives, and he did very well with it. Thank God, he's doing very well. Like no one, at the end of the day, the careers that the community defaults to happen to be the ones that are maybe seemingly more stable, but and in the end, like with enough focus and I think determination, eventually you can find success in various fields, you know, and
Wow.
that's different for different people too.
Yeah, that's true. And I love that for you as well, like that, that you were able to pursue this and have family support. And then like this concept also of like now there's so many opportunities abound. I'm just curious. So tell me about going to LA. Do you feel like that was a good decision to do that?
Of course, yeah, that's where I met my bandmates, and we became we had a lot of success writing for, and became a validated artist. I sort of came into my own as a professional musician in LA. Um, when you're in like
Mhm.
coming out of school, you just don't know where you stand competitively. I did okay at school in terms of grades, but socially I was kind of isolated. I was the only like one of two maybe Orthodox Jews in the entire place, and I basically had a social life outside of music school, more at the Boston University side of things, which was great, but professionally I just felt completely stagnant. So coming into LA, realizing, oh no, I do have what to offer. That was great, and LA is an easier place, I think, to network and meet people, and especially in the early days, just because of the culture. It's a lot more accessible than New York.
Interesting. Okay, that's really cool. So at what point do you decide you're coming back to New York and you're pursuing comedy?
Well, post COVID, LA took a massive beating. There was a great exodus of people. We didn't have any extended family there, so between the grandparents for the kids and in-laws and stuff, there was always this idea that eventually we'd come back to the East Coast. Um, and then being able to build an audience online, I was like, okay, this is interesting that it's not dependent necessarily on where you are. You could take it anywhere, so that gives you a certain sense of security that you can continue creating from anywhere. And it was just sort of that ran its course moment where it was a great time. But at the end of the day, I got the sense that I'm sitting there in LA on Zoom with everybody, still well after COVID is not dangerous and well after COVID seems to be over. Everyone is Zooming now in this new normal on a lot of things. So I was like, why am I in LA isolated from family members, and why are kids growing up without their grandparents around if I'm on Zoom in a room? Like,
Yeah.
And it's hard. Like, I still miss my community there, my friends and people. But LA is a little bit, LA is rough. It's grimy. It's very expensive. It doesn't look like Aventura. It looks like Queens with palm trees. It's not, it's a pretty beaten up place. Homelessness, expense, crime, all the practical reasons, so.
You were in the Valley?
No. I was in Pico Robertson, like the Jewish hood.
Gotcha.
And it was great. And I still love going back and stuff. But at a certain point, yeah, we made a practical decision.
And then you start stand-up in New York?
I was doing a little bit of stand-up in LA too, but I really hit the ground running once I got back to New York. And I kind of began, I'd say, training and then eventually performing, hitting up the open mic scene in New York to work out material, and then doing shows and sets on people's shows they were putting together, and then private events and corporate events, and then hit the sort of Jewish community scene of doing stuff, all in conjunction with what I was doing online too. So, yeah, that was difficult. That was a very hard thing to go back to the bottom a little bit of a process and build back up, knowing how far there is to go. But it's what's necessary, or what was for me.
So talk to me about that. And I'm curious to hear one of your, I guess, what the themes of your stand-up were.
Well, I mean, I can do impressions, but impressions are not stand-up. I mean, stand-up is its own format, its own craft. And having no idea what stand-up really was, like, what do? You get up on, it looks like the illusion is the magic trick of somebody getting up there and just talking on a mic. But you actually have to write jokes. The way you have to write songs, you have to write bits. You have to not only think of something funny, but turn it into a deliverable bit, just like a song is about something. Ooh, I'd love that song. I have this idea for a song, but it's not a song until it has a beginning, middle, end, arc, a build-up, a climactic element, and an end. Jokes work very the same way. So a lot of people watch comedians and they're like, oh, they're just kind of riffing up there and talking. That's not true. Sometimes they are, just like a band sometimes improvises or jams off a tune, but there's a structure of what's going on, And some comedians are more like classical music, where every note is completely worked out and they don't go off script. And some comedians are more like jam bands or jazz musicians, where they have a song and a structure, but they also get very playful and loose. And I'm into all of it. So you have to discover what your style is as a comedian by doing it. But first you have to train and work out the craft. I think a lot of people want to skip all that and just get up there and vibe. And they find out very, very quickly that that's not how it works. And and the hardest thing about stand-up versus anything else is that you have to rehearse in front of people. You have to practice getting good in front of an audience, as opposed to at home practicing a guitar or a song that no one has to hear until it's ready. You have to workshop your material in front of people and risk defeat, risk rejection.
Interesting.
And,
wow,
that's the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did you have the guts? Was it from, your experience with music, or did you just like take a shot? Like, how did it look like in the
I had a
beginning?
little bit of an advantage in that the stage, the mic, the audience is not like a foreign entity to me coming from the music world. So I had a bit of a comfortable sense of timing in that. But exposure therapy, you go and get uncomfortable bombing at these little, small performances and mics and open mics where you're working stuff out, sitting there for 3 hours while one person bombs after another, and you're like, oh, and you feel bad for them. It's not comfortable the whole time, and then you get pulled out of a hat, and it's your time to go to try stuff out, and it's terrible, and then you just get comfortable with that, so that by the time you get in front of a real audience that's primed to laugh, they surprisingly, you're sort of primed and ready for it. And if it doesn't work,
Interesting.
if it doesn't work, then you can move past it. You can handle it and say, okay, the joke didn't work. It doesn't say anything about me as a person. I consider myself funny, but the joke needs work, and you're able to separate the craft from the person, even if the audience doesn't. And then the exposure therapy of doing it over and over and over again makes you more comfortable, just like anything in life.
I love that. I love that so much. But I mean, how do you even start how do you come up with an idea for this? Like, as you say, like you need a beginning, you need a climax, you need to come up with a journey of a story. Like, how do you figure that out? Like, do you have an idea of like, hey, this story happened to me. This is hilarious. I want to see if I could turn that into a skit. And then you throw in a Donald Trump,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's like,
Right.
I mean, it's like how any thought about anything is generated. You think of something, and if it's interesting, you go from there. Or if it's funny, you go from there. And so having a comedic angle is sort of there to begin with, and then sharpening it of like understanding timing and jokes. And if you have a funny premise, there's like the premise, like, oh, if it's as simple as like, I don't know, putting somebody in a scenario that they're usually not in, so that it's part of the joke is that there's a surprise to it. No one expects that because they haven't heard what that would be like. So everyone's heard Donald Trump, and I could just do Donald Trump, and I could talk like this, but eventually it's going to run out of steam, folks. We could talk like that, though. You know that, right? And it won't have an effect, but if I say Donald Trump the therapist, all of a sudden it has a little bit more comedic weight, and you could, very sad, so sad what happened when it's so sad, such a sad human being, so much trauma. Ooh, so much trauma what happened. I was a great dad. I was a fantastic dad, I would date my daughter. She's beautiful, Ivanka. I would date her, and then she would need therapy. So, like, Trump as a therapist is a funnier one. And then you could go further, like, down that road. Or that's from the impressions angle. If you're just writing a joke about anything, you think of something funny, and then you try to find ways to explain, there's like, in joke writing, you have setups and punchlines. You have a premise, which is you're establishing something, but you sometimes set up and build up to what that, and establishing a premise, making a setup, and a punchline coming, which is basically sort of a misdirection, like the audience doesn't see that coming and they laugh. This kind of sterilizes what comedy is, but sometimes it's observational, where you're pointing out something that's so true, but it's sort of unrealized, and when you bring it forward, people laugh because it's like, oh my, there's relatability to it. But yeah,
that's interesting. I'm curious, is there a place where somebody could go to learn comedy?
Yeah, unfortunately, comedy is one of those art forms where it's just, there's not as much traditional schooling or formula that has been developed. Unlike music, there's music school, conservatory, books, culinary school for chefs, graphic arts design schools for artists. But the technicals of comedy there's a lacking space for it. That doesn't mean that you sort of have to learn on the streets. You have to go to the clubs. You have to start, and comedians love to geek out about, here, after a set, someone will say, hey, what you should do for that punchline? Tweak it. Put this word over here. And it would actually land much better. The reason they didn't laugh at this line, it's not because it's not funny, but you have to first say this. So set up what you're saying, or change the perspective of this person in your joke. Make it from the wife's perspective. That's funnier. And then they go, oh, that's fun. That you're right. That's what I was missing. Okay. And so there is a geekiness and technical elements to joke writing, but there isn't as much traditional schooling about it that has developed. And I think it's because comedy is so like ingrained socially in people that like
Interesting. Yeah.
in the way that, you know, music, there's a barrier to entry. Like you have to pick up the instrument and put in your time and art and things like that. But with comedy, like everybody kind of thinks they're funny and everyone thinks they could kind of be professionally funny or not. I don't know, but it's so attached to one's own identity and personality and persona that the artistic version of it, the professional version of comedy, for some reason lacks an educational infrastructure. There are books, there are things that people put out, and you know, just doing it over and over and getting better at it is the way people do it.
That's what it is, right?
Because comedy is audience dependent, like stand-up comedy. I think there's, you know, there's screenwriting and helping to, you know, you can improve upon it. There are workshops at comedy clubs. There's things like that. But the only way to know if something is really, like a teacher at the front of a classroom isn't going to say, a proper joke, yes? And this is how, and now you have no, and like the way they're going to analyze a piece of music or a piece of art, your shadowing is off. The lighting, the way you're doing your lighting is off, and we're going to use pencil technique here. With jokes, it's like, did people laugh or not? You know?
Yeah.
So no elitist professor is going to determine the funny of something. The audience will.
You know? Right. You know, what's interesting also is I was watching Russell Peters in a podcast recently, and, you know, he said that what makes a great comedian, like a truly great comedian, is that they tell jokes that only they can tell. Like, otherwise, you're kind of like replaceable if you're saying these generic jokes. And I'm curious, like, have you found a way to personalize your comedy and like come from an angle where it's like, these are jokes that only Ami can tell?
I think that's a constant discovering process, which he's right in I mean, that is true. That's like sort of the ideal, eventually finding your own voice, but it takes time to do that, and you discover it in time. I mean, in the early stages of doing comedy, you're just trying to not bomb, trying to entertain the audience.
Right.
And your voice will come as you use it.
Do you feel that you're successful? Like, this is now something like you do stand up, you're getting booked for gigs or whatever?
I feel like it's working. Yeah. I feel like what I'm putting out there is getting a response for sure.
That's so cool. And it's like, it's so incredible to me, again, like how you were able to come from music and get, you know, relative success in that, and then do comedy and get relative success in this too. And then it's like you transferred, it seems like there was like a switch post October 7th. And if you feel comfortable talking about it, I'd like to talk about that with you. It's like, you know, at first I was seeing you doing like these hilarious Jordan Peterson impressions. And then after that, I'm seeing some activism going on social media. So it's like, you want to talk me through that process? Like, what shifted for you?
What shifted was probably the most horrific massacre of Jews in Israel since the Holocaust, and the subsequent support for it, sympathy for it, coverage for it, apologies for it, denial of it. To me, that was definitely the turning point for me in terms of feeling like we were back in the late 30s, wondering how a Holocaust could have happened, and now not wondering anymore. So as a grandchild of Holocaust survivors, to always have the question of, how did it even happen? How did the world let that happen? How did people not see the evil for what it is? To see that happen in real time, currently in 2024, is pretty traumatic and startling. And I didn't go to my platform to be political. To me, it was not a political issue. This was a basic humanity versus cruelty, civilization versus barbarism and savagery issue. And comedy doesn't have a lot of time to exist in a world that doesn't respect basic humanity and dignity of me as a Jew or my community and my people, seeing what was going on. And so I still make jokes and have fun on social media, but I saw it as I just had to speak about it. There was not much else it was a personally subjective, close to home issue for me. So I wasn't going on my socials before to talk politics or policy. And that was okay. In this case, like, it hit a nerve, and I felt like I had to speak out for some common sense, moral clarity on an issue. And I saw that a lot of people responded positively to me being able to articulate those positions of what people were feeling. And just like with comedy, you're saying things that people feel, and it makes them laugh.
Yeah.
Saying things that people feel and providing that catharsis when it comes to moral issues has had a similar effect, and of being able to, that was validating that if I could do that, I'm going to continue to do that. I wish I didn't have to do that. It was sort of if a video of mine about Israel, about anti-Semitism, got a lot of views or whatever, there's something sad about that, that so many people need to hear that. I wish they didn't have to hear it. I wish it wasn't considered brave to be against anti-Semitism or pro-Israel. But unfortunately, the state of affairs, it is. And so that's what drove me to keep speaking out about it.
I mean, so what I'm curious about is like, it is crazy to me also how much anti-Semitism is tied into, the kind of pro-Palestine, anti-Israel movement. It's very evident that it's there for sure. And we could definitely discuss it, but it's like when the attacks first happened and, I guess prematurely, I was doing a podcast with my friends that we had planned to do on October 9th. So it was like, anyways, we were going to have a podcast. So we had to discuss it because, the October 7th events just happened. And it was like, in the beginning, there was definitely a very strong pro-Israel. This is, Israel has the right to defend itself. This is such atrocious attacks. And it seems like everyone, aside for like fringe few, were probably like, pro-Palestine or whatever. It was very clear that was not the direction to go. And, even I had commented that like, how many Palestinians now are going to die? Innocent people that are going to lose their homes, that are, not going to have electricity, that are going to suffer, severely because of what Hamas had done. And obviously it's like, to me, I don't know how I feel about it. I'm not like an expert in war and politics, but like there's a certain angle of like, hey, war is war. People are going to die. There are going to be casualties, but it's like to what degree? And it's like, what is a good response? What is a proper response? And to me, like the idea of like killing people close to indiscriminately, I'm not saying Israel's doing that, but like that seems like the wrong way to go. You know what I mean? And I'm curious, like, do you feel like there is fair criticism to give towards the Israel government? Or do you feel like giving any sort of criticism at all will feed anti-Semitism? Like, how do you feel on that?
Hamas wants to kill all the Jews, as stated explicitly.
Yeah.
Almost 20 years ago, Israel pulled every single Jew out of Gaza, 8,000 people out of their homes, and Hamas came a year or two later. They killed and murdered all their political opponents and had a state lit there as an experimental thing to see what happens when you give land back, and whether you think it's justified or not. They had a society that they could have turned into a peaceful, loving neighbor with Israel, and they didn't do that. That's not Israel's fault. They didn't do that. They were hell-bent on raising another generation of children to hate Jews, deeply embedded within the culture, continually attacking Israel, not just on October 7th, but rocket fire before that, kidnapping, stabbings, terrorism. Yeah. At the end of the day, if they wanted peace, they could have it in a second. They don't want it. Mm-hmm. The idea is not to create a free Palestinian state with equal rights for its citizens, with a prosperous, free, liberal society. The idea is to destroy Israel. The problem isn't the lack of existence of a Palestinian state. It's the existence of a Jewish state. That's the issue. That's the fundamental issue.
Yeah.
And the criticism that I would level at Israel is that they prolong these campaigns. They drag them out because they're willing to put their own civilians and soldiers at risk for the sake of appeasing the world and operating from a morality where the standard is to minimize civilian casualties on both sides, even if it means not winning, and even if it means putting their soldiers and civilians at risk. The job of any government fundamentally is to protect the rights and liberties and life of their own civilian population. And when a regime attacks your civilian population continually with the explicit aim of doing it until the civilian population of yours that you're representing is wiped out, for the sake of being Jewish, for the sake of being Israeli, it is your responsibility as a government, first and foremost, to eliminate that threat so that the war ends. If you want peace, you eliminate those entities that stand in the way of it proudly, which is Hamas. Yeah. And civilian casualties, innocent people who die as a result of the genocidal intentions of their own elected governments, That's the fault and accountability of their elected regimes that commit these acts of aggression against sovereign, free people. So if you do that, you incur the wrath of the justified response. Does it make mistakes? Sure, but at the end of the day, none of those civilians that you mentioned were, all of them were alive on October 4th, 5th, and 6th, Israeli and Palestinian. So when you do that, you can then not point your finger at the nation defending itself for the civilian death toll and the collateral damage. The standard of victory must be to defeat Hamas entirely. It's like if a patient has cancer, you're blaming the chemotherapy because it causes damage, which it does do to cancer cells and healthy cells alike, but you have to eliminate the cancer. And I'm saying that Hamas is the cancer with genocidal intentions to destroy the patient, which is Israel. And Israel has to eliminate it. Is it painful to go through that treatment? Absolutely. And nobody wishes death upon innocent civilians. But Hamas could have built entire defense systems if they wanted to. They didn't. Israel has defense systems to protect its civilians, and Hamas has civilians to protect its defense. They go under the ground and they invest all of their resources, not in building schools, infrastructure, roads, a prosperous society. They invest on building a terrorist state. And so they're responsible ultimately. And if they wanted to end it and stop the civilian death toll on their side, they could have surrendered and returned all the hostages. But they haven't done that. And it's only when Israel is relentless in pursuing them that we can get hostages back, not capitulating to evil and to terrorism, and to tell them that, hey, terrorism actually works. You're going to be granted a state now by these countries in the West, by Norway and Spain and Ireland. It works. You can get your terrorists back from our from our prison cells if you keep kidnapping and terrorizing Israelis. When you do that, you enable further evil. So the way to fight it and the way to minimize evil is to defeat it. And if you want peace, you eliminate those who stand in the way of it.
That's really clear. And what I'm hearing you say, and you could tell me if I'm wrong, but Hamas is a horrible evil, and there is no negotiating with Hamas. Meaning they're in their blood, in their charter, whatever it is, like they're trying to eliminate the Jewish people and they're trying to eliminate Israel. So it's like you cannot, ease up on them. Whatever. Yeah, Israel needs to do whatever it can to defeat Hamas, despite all the civilian casualties it'll cause. And you're commenting that it's not even Israel's fault. It's not Israel that's committing the civilian casualties, because Hamas could surrender and give back the hostages, and therefore it seems like it would even be Hamas's fault. So it is kind of ridiculous that Israel gets so much blame for it. And while I hear those points and I agree with it, it still to me is like, is Israel, and this is the interesting thing. I don't know. I'm not there, and maybe it's not even my place to comment on what's going on. I do talk to my friends that are in Israel, and I try to understand the facts on the ground. And people forget that there are still terrorist attacks in Israel going on today. By people coming in and committing stabbings and ramming their trucks into stuff and whatever. That is still going on today. But I'm just curious. It's like, what is the best way to defeat Hamas? Obviously, that needs to be relentless. But
I don't know. I'm not a military tactician, and neither are you, and neither is anyone in the Western journalist class commenting on this. Yeah. They have no idea how to do it. I would defer to military experts, leaders who are actually sending troops into harm's way to fight them. I have no idea. But if we agree they have to be defeated and they're accountable for what has happened, then that's the end of the discussion, as far as 100%. I'm concerned, because it's beyond my purview to comment on how the IDF should do it militarily. Gratuitous violence, I'm not in favor of. I'm not in favor of intentionally targeting civilians. I'm in favor of intentionally targeting Hamas. And if they decide to hide among civilians, they are putting the civilian population that they are responsible for protecting in harm's way. Unfortunately, they do not value the life of their civilians. They don't value life at all. They're very clear on that. That's not me being hyperbolic. That's what they say philosophically, ideologically. This is an ideological battle. It's a religious battle. They don't believe the Yahud should exist on this land. So don't be fooled. That's what we're fighting here. Yeah. And unfortunately, Israel has a very high threshold and tolerance for its own casualties and its own suffering. And I think that's immoral. That's the criticism I would say. So that's
that they're not caring about their civilians.
They're willing to sacrifice. They are totally willing to sacrifice the citizens of Sderot and their sense of safety. They're willing to sacrifice and put at risk is IDF soldiers who have to wait because the rules of engagement are so intense and strict, and they use that as a point to the West to say, see how careful we are. But they also, now people don't realize, you have a 21, 22-year-old soldier sitting in a booby-trapped building who 4 days later finds out gets blown up by Hamas terrorists because they couldn't engage with them when they had the opportunity. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that happens all the time. And,
That's
the
horrible.
pro-Palestinian side is able to use dehumanizing language to just call them soldiers and combatants and all these kinds of things. And I'm just saying they can do that. But Israel does make those concessions, unfortunately. And I think that's a big mistake because these wars drag out, more people suffer over the long run.
Yeah. So you have this incredible clarity. Where do you think the confusion is on many of these journalists and people in the West? Because it's like, you're right, Hamas is a threat that needs to be eliminated, by any means. And it's like when America got into war with ISIS and when America was supporting Saudi Arabia to attack Yemen and all sorts of stuff, like we were not any better in America, and it's like, even on a small scale, killing bin Laden, I think they also killed bin Laden's wife that was like being used as a shield. It's like America doesn't take the kinds of precautions that they're asking of Israel, that people in America are asking of Israel. So it's like, to me, that's also where I feel like there's obvious anti-Semitism here. It's like, what's with the standard, like the double standard? Like, where were your protests when America was backing Saudi Arabia and they were bombing the hell out of Yemen, and Afghanistan and like the types of mistakes that we made in the Middle East? You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's what Douglas Murray says. Like, the reason the world goes crazy and goes bananas is because they hate the Jews. It's very likely and clear it's because they hate the Jews. The reason that double standard, what animates that, I think, is anti-Semitism. What animates general hatred of Israel as a Western ally, is a couple of things. I think it's one is this non-judgmentalism that you find on the far left, that no one culture or society can be deemed better than another. It's completely morally subjectivist and relative, and it's moral relativism to say, and otherwise it's bigotry to say a free, open society is better than an oppressive, tyrannical police state that is Hamas, that enforces theocracy. We can't say one is better than the other. No. And morality is usually judged by those who have versus those who are perceived to have not. And those who have that are prosperous and powerful are necessarily villainous and evil. And those who do not have, who are perceived to be oppressed, are perceived to be virtuous. They cannot commit. What they do is not barbarism and terrorism because they're perceived to be the powerless ones. They're perceived to be the ones with less. It's the same reasons that animate why the way the far left views crime. When in inner cities crime is committed, they don't judge the actors involved. They say, no, it's the system. It's our system. It's our fault. It's this Western imperialist patriarchal bullshit. They blame that. And so in addition to not acknowledging the virtues of that system, the virtues of certain cultures and societies being morally superior in terms of ideas, better ideas for individuals that can thrive, respecting individual rights, individual liberties and property, a free society. They don't want to judge that as better, and if anything, they judge it as worse, which is odd. And I think at the end of the day, it's also about not respecting individual rights, when you view things collectively in collective tribal groups, there's a part of that animates things as well. And, whether you're on the far left and you decide to call Israel part of the white settler colonialist power in the intersection, and that's the lowest, they have to be, we could say whatever we want about them. That's how the leftists view it. On the far right, they view the Jews as this sort of cabal controlling everything behind the scenes, working secretly, controlling media. It's just dehumanizing language that doesn't respect the rights of any individuals. It's pure tribalism. So whether it comes from white identitarians and it's motivated by that and their grievances, or far left Marxists or collectivists that view the world in these intersections and abstractions, I think those are the things that don't evaluate things morally and clearly based on the sanctity of individual rights and which governments protect those best.
What's so interesting is the polarization of politics these days. And I think, you kind of mentioned even like two extremes. And I feel like in this issue too, it's like, I feel like if you asked most people on the street like what they think, I think most people would give you some type of grounded opinion of like, yeah, Israel was attacked by Hamas and they should do whatever they can to get rid of the terrorists that are there because Israel just won't be safe otherwise. I feel like most people would give you that. Maybe some people would say like, yeah, maybe Israel does have to do what they can, but they're not treating the Palestinians correctly. Like they would give you some type of grounded opinion. Where does this polarization come from? Like, why is it that we only hear of the craziest of the crazy opinions in social media?
On social media, I don't really know the expert answer on that, but
Right.
sensational. We respond to a lot of like the sensationalist, clickbaity stuff that tends
Right.
to respond to how we engage with it. So long, nuanced conversations are much harder to go viral on social media than like little clickbaity things. At the same time, while people have no attention span, the most popular podcast in the world is Joe Rogan, which is 3 hours long now. So those two
Yeah.
realities exist. Um, but I think the problem is I think a lot of the worst ideas of the left are ascendant in the culture in ways that have infected academia, certainly, as we've seen, media, corporate America, and politics like that. Those kind of things have been embraced maybe for decades, and we've seen the manifestation of that on morally confused college kids on campus who are standing in solidarity with terrorist organizations whilst thinking they're being virtuous. But I don't really know the underlying reasons for it, other than there is a tribal instinct in human beings. Like we thirst to be tribal,
Yeah.
and most of human history was brutal and awful, and people killed each other of all races, colors, creeds. We fight. We find tribes. We have an instinct for that, and to resist that tribalism is an important thing. It doesn't mean we don't, but at the same time, we also do have. We are social creatures that have, and social animals that form communities and form common bonds. It's just that when those things turn competitive to the point of violence, that we have to hold to those principles and
Yeah.
respect even those who are different than us, even if we're not part of a specific community, respecting their right to live freely. And that polarization is playing into a tribalism that's pretty dangerous. That fosters suspicion of those who are different than us, or conspiratorial thinking, or or playing into ideas that I think don't respect individuals as sovereign things, but rather as part of collective intersections. You are only virtuous if you're part of a particular race, group. I mean, the left does this all the time. The right certainly does it. We know what white supremacy looks like, that classifies people hierarchically by race. But the left does it
Mhm.
too, inversely.
Yeah.
So that's all wrong to me.
With this, what's so interesting is like, you brought up this very interesting dynamic of like this college kid that is pro-terrorism and thinks that they're being virtuous
Yeah.
doing so. And I was watching Rudy Rachman. You've had him on your
Mm-hmm.
podcast, right? So he had this one video where he went to one of these universities and he starts engaging in conversation with this college kid, and then and at first, maybe the college kid is a little aggressive, but he comes around to it, and it's actually like he's listening to
Mm-hmm.
Rudy and it's making a lot of sense. And then they start the chanting, and as soon as the chanting comes on, like you see the switch go on and he just starts the
Mm-hmm.
chanting. You know what I mean? Despite having this like thought out progressive conversation. And it's so interesting because like you would think that at the universities, like where it's all about debating and intellectualism and like understanding the ideas, you have this complete opposite, just very mob mentality, like losing a self identity, like just despite having a logical conversation about it, like, hey, maybe this isn't the exact right way to go, like instantly switching back into the chant. And it's like, and I'm so curious because it's like I'm sure this kid thinks of himself as a good kid for protesting Israel and having this kind of like pro-Palestinian rally.
Well, universities are not currently places of debate and exploring ideas and challenging ideas. It maybe once upon a time they were, certainly
Mhm.
a public square
Yeah.
of challenging your ideas, and they're not. They're no longer centers. It seems from the outside, they're not centers of teaching
Yeah.
you how to think, but they're teaching you what to think, and to be on the side of virtuous causes. They've become activist centers. Seems like a lot of these
Hmm.
professors have a certain view. I think it's stacked, obviously, in one direction, to believe certain things about the West, about history, certain narratives, a far left-wing narrative that teaches you what to think. And in order to feel virtuous and having a meaningful experience, you want to be on the side of a singular way of thinking that is the right way, that is the virtuous way. And when something challenges that, like, are you really as an 18-year-old, like, brave enough to stand with a side that may be perceived that, that the adults in the room are telling you is the wrong side? The adults in the room are these professors and administrators that are either on board with siding with terrorism or too spineless to call it out. So they created these Frankensteins. So what do the kids expect? In a way, I mock them and I have fun making fun of it. But at the same time, you're 18, 19 years old. You're still in a student, professor, adult mentality where you're looking to the adults. And I think there's something alluring about going to college and all of a sudden the plot twists in the movie that you're in of life of, oh, wow, everything I've been told growing up is the other way. America's the bad guy. The whole time I thought America was the good guy. And now the adult in the room in a short sleeve polo shirt with unkempt hair is telling me, oh my God, it was America's the bad guy the whole time. Wow. So, you want to be a little bit gracious to that and blame where it's really coming from, which I think is the professorial whatever, the professorship and the administrator that's putting these ideas in. But yeah, the sheepishness is crazy.
It is crazy.
But that's at that point in life, you're trying to form an identity and you're trying to be part of something virtuous and meaningful. So it's very sad. Yeah.
It's very sad. All right. But I'm curious, like, what do you think creates real change? How do you reach people and talk to them in a way that's actually meaningful, that can change their mind? Because it's like, I would think it's like that Rudy Rahman direction where it's like he actually went down there, had a real conversation. But it was fascinating. The moment the mob just started that chant, like he switched back,
Yeah, that turned on his tribal button. But Rudy, I think, actually is one of the few people, the reason I had him on is because of what he's done actually changing minds. He's not just shouting into an echo chamber. He's leaving it and actually making inroads, I think, with people. So he's effective. I think also, from the way I take it, is just constantly telling the truth to the best that you see it, and using clear, precise moral language when you do it, which I think helps reinforce people who are being confused by the moral confusion out there. I don't know if anything I say out there changes someone's mind. Certainly not when I'm being satirical and making fun of it. That's sort of just to provide a little bit of relief in this mess. I don't expect somebody who's been chanting from the river to the sea to watch one of my funny videos making fun of them and say, you know what, I was wrong. But that's just having fun with it. We need to have a little fun in life, and I'm perfectly happy to mock those who are siding with terrorists. But in changing their mind, I think human-to-human interactions, when somebody meets somebody and they're like, I thought he was evil, but I actually kind of like him. He actually has like a good vibe and seems like he was honest. That may be going to make me think a little bit. So the human experiences tend to do that, but I don't know. At the end of the day, it becomes hard to not. If after October 7th, watching what was proudly displayed on body cameras, if you don't know where you stand, if you're confused, it's hard for me to have sympathy for that. Your moral compass is a little bit broken and twisted, and I think you need to fix yourself before I can do anything for you. So that's one mindset. So, at the end of the day, but there's a lot stacked against us. But maybe it's just meant to be that way. I don't know. One can get very cynical about it, but you just tell the truth.
Tell the truth. I love that. Speaking of telling the truth, when are you getting Jordan Peterson on your podcast, man?
Tomorrow, actually. I don't know. Well, yet it remains to be seen, but manifest, that'll be an interesting conversation because we'll both just be doing Jordan Peterson. So, well, the whole bloody time it's going to be like talking to a mirror, talking to the Jungian shadow. So we'll see.
Dude, I would love to.
I'm sure
that. Just like
it's anticipated. But hey, I did Gary Vee and eventually opened VCon with Gary Vee himself. So you never know. I have my sights set.
Yeah,
we'll see.
Yeah, but going back to saying the truth, I'm just curious. It's like I think a lot of people would tell you that their moral confusion comes from seeing the incredible amount of civilian casualties on the Palestinian side, it's heartbreaking. It really is heartbreaking. And I think like, and again, it's like, I'm not a military tactician. I don't know what would, like, I don't have a better suggestion. I don't at all. But it's like, it's hard for me to believe that like I shouldn't say it's hard for me to believe, but it's like, it's a very painful, it would be a very painful truth if the only way to get rid of Hamas would be with the immense amount of civilian casualties. You know what I mean? And I think people see that.
It would be.
And
it is a
yeah.
painful truth. There's an entire network of terrorist tunnels built underground under every major civilian entity in Gaza. These UNRWA facilities where they held hostages, these hospitals where they held hostages. They found bodies in Rafah in people's homes. And it doesn't take much or it doesn't take that many clips to give you the perception of indiscriminate destruction and bombing. You could see a bunch of rubble, not realizing that that building housed a window that was specifically outfitted so that a terrorist can go from an RPG and fire at Israeli soldiers. So you see the aftermath and the destruction, and if you rewind and zoom out, you might not know that a rocket was being fired repeatedly from this building. Now, Israel could just sit there and keep taking the rocket fire, or they can destroy the building and eliminate the threat.
Right.
But again, I'm not on the ground looking, but I have spoken to people who have been in the room as they're making these decisions, and they are saying no in one case and yes in another case. They are saying, wait, somebody's having. I heard stories of someone who was walking a donkey with a tarp over it, and they couldn't verify what was under the tarp, so they avoided taking out the donkey with the tarp. Turns out later they found out when they took the tarp off, it was full with rocket launchers and weapons being used to commit terrorist acts and attacks against Israelis. It is a shame. Sad. War is a shame. War sucks. War is awful. End it quick.
Yeah.
Have it be over. You want to get to peace? Eliminate those who keep bringing on war. They want this.
Right.
So channel your outrage. If it's heartbreaking to see these images. Shame on Hamas for attacking Israel and for committing to doing it instead of building up a peaceful neighbor next to Israel, which they could have done.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate your moral clarity.
You got it.
Honestly, I would love to have somebody like a pro-Palestinian, I don't know, person that would have similar conversation. I'd be very curious to hear their perspective as well. But I want to ask you, have you gotten into trouble for your perspectives and what the activism that you've been doing?
In what sense? Trouble? No, not really. I mean, there's hateful
death threats,
there's people,
cancellation.
There's people in the comments who are evil, who celebrate the death of Israeli children and who celebrate and laugh with emojis at images of kidnapped girls who are about to be raped. There's people like that. Sometimes they're bots.
That's horrible.
Sometimes there's like automatic Free Palestine emoji bots in the comments. Sometimes there's a threat, and when there is, I just block them. And otherwise, it's text on a screen. That's it. I mean, I lost a little bit of followers in the beginning. I don't know, 15,000 or so, and then I think have since gained back more than that. But if you're, if you like Jordan Peterson impressions and Gary Vee impressions and Prince Harry impressions and Hamas, like you can leave. It's okay, So that's the trouble.
Right.
It's not trouble yet. I hope it doesn't become that. So I would say more positive than negative. It's easy to see negative, but probably more positive.
How about like the Candace Owens interview and stuff? How did that go?
How did it go?
Yeah.
Did you see it?
Honestly, just a little bit.
It went well. It was a nice chat. Since then, I've been disappointed with what I've seen. Even most recently, like yesterday, it's just, I think it probably might require a round 2. Maybe that will make some inroads. The lesson learned is like the way to combat ignorance is not by yelling at it, by engaging with it. But I'm still increasingly getting more suspicious as to what's motivating her and what's going on with this obsession that I've been seeing repeated patterns for that have been definitely disturbing to me.
Interesting. You want to talk a little bit more on that?
Well, yeah, it's just tweets and tweets and tweets that continue to stoke and embolden some of the worst, most nefarious anti-Semites out there. Even if I know she has said many, many times she doesn't harbor ill will towards the Jewish people or individuals or whatever, I see this pattern of, taking the nefarious actions of some Jews that she may have issues with and extrapolating on that and collectivizing that guilt as to be applied to the Jewish community as in an entirety, as a totality, which is so odd because, her critiques of BLM, for example, were all about not taking the actions of one bad cop who happens to be white and saying all white people are a problem. Whiteness is a problem. She was very into calling that out, but somehow when a Jewish person is bothering her or does something, it's somehow something else going on. There must be some grand, bigger thing behind all this. Jewish gangs, look, weird language that I do think emboldens a lot of anti-Semitism, whether she does it advertently or explicitly or intentionally or not. It's possible to not feel a certain way about Jews, and I'll take that at her word. But, at a certain point, this pattern of wanting to highlight only the worst among us when there's such a disproportionate amount of good, Yeah, we got Bernie Madoff. We got Jeffrey Epstein. We also got Milton Friedman, Simon and Garfunkel. Take your pick. Steven Spielberg. You want to live without all those things too? All the Nobel laureates, all the incredible benefits and contributions the Jewish community has made to the world, and all the values that Candace advocates for to the black community over the years. To get out of a victim mentality, you want to know like which community has done a pretty good job at being victimized historically, but coming out of a victim mentality and becoming successful? It's right next to you. Look to the Jews. Yeah. So we are only embodying the values that you advocate for, which makes this whole thing very confusing. Two-parent families, education, focus, scholarship, accomplishment, like these are the things that she advocated for to her community, so to speak. So I'm not sure why it's met with suspicion.
Interesting. So when do you think there might be a part two?
That's we'll see what happens. I'm open to it, but we'll see what happens to address these things.
Thank you so much for coming onto this podcast. I had a really great time. Fascinating hearing your story, and it's like I would love to dive deeper into it. Definitely want to do a part two with you.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
any
for sure, man. If there were one thing that you could yell from the rooftops that everyone in the world was listening to right now, what would you want them to know?
I'd said this actually on another podcast probably yesterday, but if it's in regards to Israel, Hamas wants to kill all the Jews. They say it proudly and explicitly. End of discussion. There's nothing else to talk about. Forget all these other two-state solutions and these kinds of things and policy and anything it's not on Israel. They want to kill all the Jews because they're Jews, not because they took land, not because of any sort of other thing other than the fact that they exist as Jews and as a Jewish state, and that's what they want to do. So remember, it's a non-starter. Otherwise, career advice, just, work really hard and be very, very consistent, and your pathways hopefully can be revealed to you. But write things down in front of you on a little whiteboard of the things you want to do, work really hard, put in the reps. Those are two completely different messages.
I love that.
But anyway, hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah. As always, guys, the Ami's, contacts and stuff and his podcast and everything else will be linked in the description. Definitely go check him out. As well as you are capable, guys, stay curious and to the rebellion, of course.